Just want a clarity on where does the lockdown put Francis Luagamachate from Progressive Independent News Agency. Sorry, Minister. Where does this lockdown put the informal traders, particularly those running spaza shops in the communities? Will they be operating, considering that they also sell some of the goods that are essential, such as groceries? Or if they are not operating, is there any sort of relief? And the next question will be on the taxis ferrying. Minister Mbalula mentioned that the taxis will be allowed only to ferry those who are considered to be rendering essential services. And those who those who stay in remote areas and wanting to go to shops to buy, how do they get transported then in this lockdown? Thank you.
You have started well. Can we all follow that example? Not more than 2 questions. And no preambles.
FM. My one question was covered with regards to those who work on remote areas.
Who are you? I'm Jackson Mtembo.
Snetemba Matolo, Jacaranda FM. My other question still goes to Minister Mbalula. The taxis that are only for the essential services, how do those taxis, e-hailing or otherwise, know which one is essential services, which one is not? Are they just going on faith, I guess? Minister Lamula, are the inmates or have the inmates been tested as well? And this obviously links to the officials that may or may not have the virus. Lastly, Minister Patel, when it comes to
we have agreed on 2. Can you count? 1, 2. Thank you. Give another person. Thank you very much.
Thank you. My name is Komojo Mabelana. I'm from POW 987. I just want to find out, with regards to people who may need to travel outside provinces to attend funerals, will they be allowed to do that? And with regards to transport, what about the people who are using private drivers or company drivers to take them to and from work? How is that going to work? Thank you.
Thank you. Next.
Minister Peter de Tooy from News 24. Can you or one of your colleagues please clarify the position of journalists during the time period of lockdown, what we will need to move around? Minister of Communication earlier said press cards, ID, and a letter from your company. Minister Tsele said something differently. Can you just clarify what we need to be able to do our jobs? Thank you.
Next.
Hello?
Okay. It's Kani Mapanga from News 24. Minister Zulu, I just wanted to clarify, is there an alternative to this GBV command center other than contacting this hotline? There may be some victims of abuse that may not have that resource. Do you have temporary shelters for people that might want to escape now before this 21-day lockdown and ensure that they're in a safe space? And then for Minister Mbalula, I have a question on behalf of my colleague at Business Insider. We just need clarity on the statement, those allowed to make the necessary permitted movements. Does this include general members of the public that may want to do grocery shopping? Are these the hours that they are permitted to use public transport?
Hello? Hi.
Next, yeah.
This is Bitumela Masitlhaho from Travel News Weekly and Tourism Update. My question is for Minister Motsoaledi. You said that all international and domestic flights have been cancelled and that Home Affairs will only issue IDs. With the issuing of visas, those were currently in the process of issuing from when the President announced the national state of disaster. What will happen to those visas at this time?
Next.
Good evening. It's Alex Mitchley from News 24. If we could just maybe clarify on movements be able to make. For instance, people that are separated and have kids, will they be able to move around to drop the kids off? Are there specific times people are allowed to shop? Are people with elderly parents allowed to go visit their parents? Perhaps we can just get total clarity. Is it that you cannot leave the house unless you want to shop or go to the hospital? Or are there other allowances that can be made?
Next.
My name is Aserin Lovo. I'm from Capital Life. I just want to quickly ask Minister Mbalula. Minister, you mentioned that you only mentioned the renewal of licenses, driver's licenses. What about those that booked before this lockdown was announced and their date is within the lockdown? Question number 2 goes to the regulators. Can I quickly ask, tomorrow is the last day to shop whatever, and these other shops like your liquor stores, they will be open. What happens to those that will lift up the prices tomorrow? Are they going to be affected just like the shops that you mentioned earlier? Thank you.
You are the last one this side.
Ministers, my name is Itekani Magwedza from Newsroom Africa. I just want to ask if there are any measures in place to ensure that where people are shopping, there aren't more than 100. And the same goes for funerals as well. Are you in any way policing those?
Is the lady here the last one this side?
Hi, Nomvelo Chalembera from News 24. To Minister Motsoaledi, the Beitbridge border post is currently overcrowded with long lines with people waiting for 12 hours to pass through. Are there any provisions that are going to be made for those who would have been waiting in line tomorrow and probably goes past the lockdown? Or what happens and what is sort of happening, because it's supposed to be social distancing? Are there any health provisions that have been taken with so many people at the border at the moment?
Thank you. We will then request our colleagues to answer. We'll start with any of your colleagues this side. You can use the mic that is next to you to answer the questions. Yeah.
Thank you very much. I'll just talk about the funerals. Funerals obviously are an exception because you can't say people shouldn't bury. But again, during the lockdown, we have to limit the numbers. And in the new regulations, the funerals can only be attended by 50 people. Of course, this is again a problem of people who are together, as you have seen in the church in the Free State or in South Korea, where a lot of people got infected from the church and people sing, and so it's reduced during the lockdown to 50. Thank you. Also, night vigils are not allowed because for the same reason. So that's what is in the regulations. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other colleague this side you want to take a question? Minister Mbalula.
Hello, yes. Question 1 in relation to taxis, transporting people staying in remote areas. We want to explain that in terms of the regulations, all people are actually catered for in terms of public transport, particularly prioritizing essential services. And like I said in my prelude, the President has spoken about that matter of essential transport, and that take into consideration those people who will be attending to essential services, hospitals, and if you want to buy groceries and you are staying in a remote area, obviously you'll be catered within the time of 9 o'clock or 5 o'clock to 9 o'clock in the morning, and you'll be catered also for, you'll be catered also for 4 o'clock to 8 p.m. In terms of taxis transporting people staying in remote areas. The lockdown that we are in seeks to limit unnecessary movement, and that we stay indoors and stay in our homes. So that also have got an impact in transport, because you can't commute like business as usual. If you talk about today, in Park Station, people are packing and leaving in numbers. That's exactly what is not needed. That's exactly what is not needed. We don't need jam-packed people in taxis, taxi ranks, and all of that. So it affects every mode of transport. Railway, totally shut down. For essential service, it means if you want to buy grocery, or in any other instance, it could happen that somebody is sick and so on, that will be catered within those hours. Beyond that, that will be a necessary movement that will be undertaken in between the hours that we have mentioned. We don't expect any movement of public transport between 9 o'clock and 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and from 4 o'clock to 8 p.m. in the evening. 8 p.m., that's the shutdown. How does a taxi define essential service? Will taxis be allowed to operate between 5 to 9? Yes. Taxis will be allowed to operate for essential service between 5 o'clock to 9 o'clock in the morning, and also in the evening. So that essential service is what those taxis, minibus taxis, will cater for. With regard to buses, there will be no buses and mass that will be transporting people. It will only be buses that are transporting people to work, let's say ESCOM workers, and those will be going to the hospital. Now, there will be no mass movement of buses like on a normal basis, where buses transport people for all different reasons on a daily basis. So that needs to be clear. Accompanying drivers on essential service transport, you can't accompany anyone on essential service transport. You are in a transport because you are going to render essential service. You are either going to work at the hospital, or otherwise you are going to a factory that has been defined for essential service. You can't accompany anyone. That is not only discouraged, it is not something that is actually permissible. So if you share transport and you can give a proof that you are going to work for an essential service, it means you are not ferrying anyone, you are simply going to work in terms of your transport. On general members for public transport, general members for public transport are prohibited in terms of movement. Movement that will take place is only for essential service. You are going to buy grocery in the morning, whatever time, or in the afternoon. Transport will transport you for that purpose if you are in a remote area, meaning you will only be transported for that particular purpose. Dates for those who booked and their date fall within the lockdown, there will be no service for driver's licenses and people who are booked. And those who are booked will be redeemed after the lockdown. But if within the lockdown your driver's license has expired, you will not be taken as somebody who doesn't have a driver's license. That will be redeemed after the lockdown. Meaning, colleagues, that is not even an expectation. The lockdown is about limiting our movement, unnecessary movement, and stay where we are. No taxi rank going for any other work except essential service. And that is what these rules are actually about. And that goes also for aviation. There will be no airlines coming from outside expected here, except if it is cargo for essential service. And even in terms of that cargo, our direction is that they will not disembark. If the cargo is disembarking, is being offloaded from the countries that are defined as risk, that cargo must be sanitized. That goes for aviation and maritime. So it's a movement all round of the lockdown. Does not only affect minibus, taxis, aeroplanes, and all of that. So the lockdown means that we limit our movement. We stay where we are. The only time we move, it is if there is anything of necessity that says we must move. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister Lamon.
Thank you, Minister Mthembu. I hope now South Africans understand why we had to be the last group to brief the nation with regard to the regulations. I think with regard to the question directed to me about inmates, whether they've been tested or not, I'm a bit not very sure to speak about issues of health. I see the Minister of Health has left. But there is a procedure that the Department of Health advises before you can test someone. So correctional services is also being advised by the Department of Health in terms of procedures that they need to follow if there is a suspected case. Firstly, it was a suspected case of officials, which they had to take out and isolate from working with any of the inmates who were then tested. But then it meant that they also needed to isolate the inmates or any other official that might have come into contact with that particular official. I think in terms of the Department of Health, you can then test if that official was found to be positive. But all the officials that have been tested thus far have not been found to be positive. So there was no need to test as per that kind of a procedure that has been put in place as we speak. It is now we're only waiting for the results of the other 5 officials, and there has been measures put in place for any official who came to contact with them, including the inmates who might have come into contact with them in that regard. With regard to the spaza shops, yes, the spaza shops will be allowed to operate, and it is encouraged that you buy in that spaza shop. You must buy nearest to where you are. If you want to go to buy any essential services, your first point of call is that spaza shop. If you are staying anywhere where you are nearest shop, you are encouraged to go to the nearest shop. So that is the reason why the regulation speaks about the limitation of movement. The intention, as everyone has been saying, is to limit unnecessary movement. It's only when that whatever that you may want in the spaza shop or in the nearest shop may not be there, that you can move to any other area nearer to where you are. But you must be able to explain that in case the police meet you along the way and ask you some few questions. So it must be able to be justified. So the purpose of the regulation is that if you want to buy the nearest place to where you are. And if you cannot find it wherever the nearest place, you can then go to the next nearest place of where you might be. So that is the purpose of the regulations in regard to the issue of buying on essential services.
Bob, Tyler.
Thank you very much. The clan has asked if they will be permitted to cover. You have been doing it. On the discussion, you agree that your appointment cards will be enough to identify yourself to cover the issues around 21 days.
It's called a press card. Appointment or press card in their language.
Press card, well, they are appointed. They're appointed by press or by whoever, but they're appointed. If you are not appointed by press, you won't be there. Simple. But there is one issue that was raised, that there are the group of people that are very high on mobility. You might attend 5 events a day. We'll have to monitor that. Because if but at least you know what happens in KZN. Once you know and you proceed to go around, these guys in KZN, they are charged for a very serious thing, attempted murder. So that's serious. So we have to guard against your high mobility, that you might attend 5 events a day and only to find that you are no more a potential carrier, you are. So those are the things that will expect yourself to make some contribution in better understanding one working relationship, be there, but also they will limit themselves. Banga crowd nje kube yibo bodwa. So limit themselves, understand that there is a less figure. By the way, one thing has not been explained here. There is no more 100. There is no figure called 100. It's out of the regulations. That's why we deal with 50 when it comes to funerals. Maybe that's a number we have at the present moment. With everybody inside there, not just journalists, but everybody. So, but there's been a big debate that number is too big. As the days go forward, we might revisit even that 50 going forward. So I hope we'll cooperate. The issue here is what has been said. Every individual must stay put where you are, and leaving your place must have a very serious reason. But as the president puts it verbatim, you will have to be on the strictly controlled movement. You not just feel like going. Even your movement will have to be controlled. Otherwise, we might be a situation that is catastrophic. So we better work now harder so that we've got a better future. Thank you very much.
Minister Mtsoaledi.
There were 2 questions for Home Affairs. The first one is, what are we going to do with the people who have already applied for visas before the presidential announcement? I think they'll get them after the 21 days. I've already mentioned that Home Affairs will only process 3 documents: death certificate, replacement ID, replacement birth certificate. So we won't be issuing any visas. We'll only process them after the 21 days. The second question is about Beit Bridge. What happens at Beit Bridge at midnight tomorrow? I'm not sure why the question is about Beit Bridge only, but I must mention that all ports of entry, that includes Beit Bridge, at midnight tomorrow, there will be more movement. Everything will be closed for human beings. Only goods and essential services will pass through. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Minister Zulu. Okay.
I'm not going to put my... the issue was with regards to alternatives for shelters. May I remind you that we've got over 100 shelters across the country. We also have white door safe places in Kuselega. These are in the regulations. If you go through the regulations, you will realize that they are also essential services and they have to continue operating. But of course, now that we have the regulations, we still have to issue the directive to provide more clarity on how this will work during the lockdown. The command center has the list of contacts, so when anybody makes a call in distress, the command center is able to locate where that person is and then give the directive of what needs to be done. I also would like to say that it's not only just about the issue of the gender-based violence or any form of violence, by the way, because we're saying gender-based violence is a priority for us, but there are other forms of abuse that might happen. We still have to deal with issues of removal of children who are in distress, because this will probably happen. That's the normal thing that we normally do. We still have to work with social workers and so forth and see how we're going to coordinate that. We also have to remind you that we have provincial structures, we have local structures. So everything that we're talking about here, we are in constant contact with the MECs of provinces. And also we are in contact with some of the NPOs that we work with, who, many of whom have stepped up already to say, Minister, where we need to be of assistance to you, we will be able to assist you. We still have to deal with children who are in, who have parents who have custody and visitation rights. We have to deal with what happens then, because some will say 21 days is a very long time, but I think we'll have to find a way of ensuring that parents appreciate and understand that movement itself is a problem, and therefore the movement of the children is going to be difficult, but we know what it is when parents want their children if they have the custody and visitation rights. Thank you.
Minister Patel.
Thank you. There were two questions. The first related to any limits in shopping areas. So I would like to just indicate that the regulation sets out very clearly that there are three conditions that apply in the sale of essential goods. The first one, that a retailer must place controls to ensure that consumers keep a distance of at least 1 meter from each other. So the numbers that come in will vary depending on the size of the store and the arrangements that are made. The second thing is that all stores, all shopping centers and supermarkets selling these goods must follow all directions on the hygienic conditions. Those may be issues like hand sanitizers and so on that applies. The third condition is those retailers that don't only sell food. Some retailers sell a complete range of products. They will be limited only to sell the essential goods that are set out in the regulations, so that it doesn't become a basis to go for a general shopping. We're doing this both to cut numbers and to cut the time that is spent in the store, so that South Africans really, our people all go, complete the basic shopping and return home as quickly as possible. The second question related to pricing issues, and Commissioner Mabuza has indicated, and Commissioner Bonakele, that they'd just like to add something. Commissioner Bonakele, if you may come up.
Zawuncedwa yimi. Zakunceda kaloku.
The last.
There we are. Enkosi.
Thank you. We've decided in the interest of time to have a division of labor, so I'll take the question by myself. The question was, what will happen to those shops that increase prices tomorrow? It's important to mention that we recognize that we are in a phase of enforcement. And we will be enforcing the law tomorrow and throughout the national disaster period. That's what we'll be focusing on. We've stopped everything else we do to enforce the laws. Where people need to coordinate in order to ensure that there is adequate supplies, there are various provisions that are available to them, one of which is to apply for an exemption. There are exemptions that have already been given to industry to enable them to coordinate, because we recognize that in times like this, it may be important for people to coordinate. And so some provisions of the law, Competition Act, may have to give way to ensure that there is adequate supply. And Minister Patel has granted a couple of exemptions to the Competition Act to ensure that we have everything that we need. But absolutely we will enforce whatever happens tomorrow, and whatever happens during the next 21 days will be monitored. Thank you.
I'd like just to add finally that we are looking at the question of opening times of retail stores to limit movements, and we will be talking to the supermarkets about opening early and closing early and then issue directions, and we'll do similar arrangements in respect of spaza shops. As my colleague Minister Lamola has said, we want to encourage people to shop at the local shop, at the spaza shop, to limit movements, so these may also be reflected in the opening hours.
Minister Kara.
Chairperson, because at the end of the day, police will have to do their work, I love to put things clear, black and white. We have one figure at the present moment, is 50, on the question of how many people get there. So the head of policing, Masimula there, and the National Commissioner, until that other figure is determined. The figure that has been given going to funeral is 50. So this one too will stay 50. They'll work with the shop to count, be short in the shop and go. Otherwise, police would not know what to do. I just wanted to make that point. Thanks.
Thank you very much. We will now take, before we come to you colleagues, let's go to our colleagues in Cape Town. As we said when we started, we have a studio in Cape Town. Number one, Cape Town, ask your questions. We have got 4 people only that are going to ask questions. Number one.
Thank you very much, Minister. It's Marianne Merton from the Daily Maverick. May I start with the first question, which is very simple. What do people have to produce when they are moving to buy groceries or when they go maybe to the pharmacy? Do they need a piece of paper? Is it going to be enough if I go out to go buy groceries? Is it going to be enough if I get stopped by a constable or a sergeant to say, I'm on my way to buy groceries? What are the instructions to police? Can they say to me, ma'am, our instructions are no movement of people, please go home, otherwise I arrest you? We need absolute clarity on that, please. On that point, perhaps the Ministers of Transport and Police may also assist me in clarifying. The Minister of Transport says that there are limitations on public transport in the mornings and the afternoons, and then people can catch taxis and buses for essential services to go grocery shopping, etc., etc. However, Annexure D, as read out by the Police Minister, clearly states that taxi ranks will be closed to the public and bus stations will be closed to the public. How are buses and taxis going to be operating, or are there exemptions in place at this stage? The other question that I have, please can you clarify absolutely simply? Because there's a lot of speculation going around, especially in the leafy suburbs.
Colleague, we will take your
food
that
delivery
question.
services like Mr. D, Uber Eats, and grocery delivery services be allowed to operate? And my last question is to the Minister of Justice, please.
Colleague, you are abusing us now. Who's our person in that auditorium? Who's our person in that auditorium? Colleague, you are now abusing us. We only take 2 questions at a time. Now you are on your 4th question. We have got many people who want to ask questions. Thank you very much. We'll consider your first 2 questions. The next one in Cape Town, 2 questions, please.
Jarl Ranger from Report newspaper. Can I continue?
Definitely.
Ministers, 5 million people in South Africa, of the South African, that's a third of the South African workforce, are working in the informal sector. I think about 1 million of them are domestic workers, of which probably 50%, at least 50%, are chars who depend on public transport for their livelihoods. They have short wage cycles, weekly wage cycles. You are cutting off, with these regulations, their income. As far as I can see, I see if you really broadly interpret the regulations, you can probably say they are cleaning services. But from Minister Tele's attitude, it seems to me that there's not going to be much discretion on the part of the police people who have to implement these regulations. There are others in the informal sector like reclaimers, waste reclaimers, recycle reclaimers, who move, their livelihoods depend on moving around and collect waste. You are cutting off their income. They similarly have very short income cycles weekly at the most. Can you respond? Because I think I'm
Thank you. You
seeing
have asked your question.
big problems with this.
You have asked your
Second
question. Yo. So it was a question with a preamble, a long preamble. In fact, it's 2 questions.
Out, Minister.
Thank you very much. The third person.
That's it.
The third one. Thank you very much.
Can I just point out that in the previous round you had four people asking questions from one media outlet.
Questioner number 3 in Cape Town, or are you 2?
We are only 2 here.
Oh, thank you. We will answer those questions. In fact, before we even answer those questions, let's take this round here so that we answer all of them. The lady here, and the gentleman over there, the lady there, gentleman, and the lady at the back, and the gentleman there. Thank you very much. How many are you? But start. You'll be the last one.
Antoinette Slavert from Rapport newspaper. Minister Mbalula, just about e-travel, the industry is in dire straits, and I believe they've approached government for assistance and maybe an exemption from levies and charges for 6 months. Has there been any decision or progress in putting together an aid package for the air travel industry? And then just on post-border cargo movement. Can the truck driver continue on his route across the border, or do you need a staff or a driver change on the border? Thank you.
Next.
Yes, Ministers, John Fraser, ZA Confidential. I'd just like to add to that question from Cape Town on delivery of from places like Woolworths and other markets, and expand it slightly. What is the position of courier services? Are they banned? Are they allowed? Because courier services do also transport stuff like pharmaceuticals, essential goods of that kind. Could you just clarify that area? And secondly, in general terms, you're announcing the biggest clampdown on civil liberties in South Africa since apartheid, since the end of apartheid. You're telling us we can't walk our dogs. You're telling us that you're driving to drink, but we can't buy any booze after Thursday night. Has it occurred to any of you ministers that possibly you're going just a little bit too far? You've announced some very sensible things like distancing yourself from your colleagues, yet there's a police officer over there who is sitting well within an unsafe zone of his colleagues. In this particular room, such rules have been ignored. Honestly, there seem to be double standards. You sanitize your podium, and we have to sit here without the sanitization.
But we have sanitized your mic, please. We have sanitized the mic that we have just used now. We are busy sanitizing it. Can we get to the next speaker?
Thank you, Minister. Takwana Dani, Eyewitness News. This one is for Minister Motsoaledi. In terms of foreign nationals who are from neighboring countries who come to South Africa on 30-day permits, some of them are expiring during the lockdown. The Lesotho special permit is expiring during the lockdown. What's going to happen to those people? What should they do? We understand that you're not going to process any documents during this time. And secondly, to Minister Patel, in terms of items that one can buy, people are citing things like cigarettes, that if they're not allowed to buy cigarettes, they might end up buying illicit cigarettes. So are there things like cigarettes, will they be allowed, or other items outside of food that is considered as essential items? Thank you.
Next. Kuluma baba, ngisho ne mic. Oh, okay, sanitizer, sorry. Sorry. Yeah, we are living in difficult times.
Through the wound, Minister. It's Govan here from ENCA. Just like to confirm that if you find people chilling on the corner in the areas you're going to, arrest them. And my question really is, where will these people who will be arrested be held? Will you have separate holding cells for non-corona patients, suspected corona patients, and positive corona patients? And how exactly will they be appearing in court? And then secondly, just on to the Minister of Defense and the Minister of Police as well. What was the instruction to the SAPS and the soldiers, and what recourse would ordinary citizens and journalists have when they feel violated by either the SAPS or the soldiers, particularly as the press, because we know that there are rogues within the security service? Thank you.
Next.
Good evening. It's Barry Baton from ENCA. It's just I want clarity on two situations that we've had. The first, what is the status of the citizens who are repatriated from Wuhan? This 21-day lockdown we're going into overlaps with their 21-day quarantine. Are they going to have to stick it out in the hotel until the end of the general lockdown? And then the other issue relates to the asylum seekers living at the Methodist Church at Green Market Square. That's been an ongoing issue. It appears not to have been dealt with. But what's going to happen now that we're going to lockdown? Thank you.
Thank you.
It's Rorisang Khosana from The Citizen. What I'd like to know is, since the essential services personnel, such as ourselves and the Defence Force, will be the most exposed during this lockdown, will we also be subject to regular testing? And I've got a question about traditional healers. Where do they fall under? Some people turn to them for healthcare. Do they fall under essential services? Thank you.
Okay.
Sipo from SABC. Problematic. Can I get something that works? Is it working? Okay. Sipo from SABC TV News. Yeah, my question is similar to that of my colleague. Has the SNDF been trained to handle civilians? We've seen certain videos that seem to suggest heavy-handedness from the police members, from the army rather. And Minister, you've said those videos are fake. But of course, there are fears that the army is not trained to deal with civilians. So in this instance, has there been an instruction in terms of how they should be dealing with civilians in case I'm going to a shop and then I'm stopped by a soldier and they don't believe me that? So has there been training in terms of how they should be handling us? And also, I hear that the Minister of Police says that people that break quarantine rules have been charged with attempted murder. But will police play a role in tracing suspected cases that are not coming forward? So if you know that somebody has tested positive and they were suspected to be in a certain environment with that person, will police play a role in tracing suspected cases? Thank you.
If I'm not mistaken, that gentleman is the last one before we answer.
Thank you, Minister Mthembu. Minister Tsele, just for clarification, you said press card. Do we need to fill in the permit as stated in the Government Gazette? And if you don't fill in that permit, can you still move around with your press card? Minister of Justice, is it a difficult debate this, just to follow on my colleague's question, to limit people's right of movement, freedoms that we've got in this country? Was it a difficult philosophical debate for you as Minister of Justice, given the tradition that we've got of individual freedoms? Thank you.
Thank you. You? But looks like these are new hands. Still old hands.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Okay, so Vickers Burger from Media 24. Sorry, just two questions. One to the Minister of, both actually to the Minister of Police. The one is, with all due respect, I don't think you answered my colleague from News 24, Alex's question. If I stay in a complex, can I walk in my complex? If I have a sickly mother, elderly mother, can I take food to her? Okay, so that's the one question. I just want real clarity on the movements. I mean, also some people will walk to the shop, so I just really want clarity on that. Then the second thing with regards to the media and doing their job, a lot of people working in the media are not journalists. It is people that distribute different publications, titles, to the different areas. Some are proofreaders that need to go to the offices to do layout, stuff like that. So how is this? How are they going to be restricted? Will they also be allowed to go to the office, do their jobs? Or will a letter from an editor or a CEO suffice? Press cards, just clarity on that. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Arisa. I'm also from Media 24. This is also to Minister Tsele. We just want to know, what proof will police need if someone wants to move around? In other words, if I am a person and I want to walk to the shop and I tell you I'm walking to the shop, but meanwhile I'm going around the corner to chat with my neighbor, what proof will the policeman need? Will I be allowed to just lie to him or say, when will we be arrested, basically? And on the second question, it's also a question that my colleague Alex from News 24 asked. If a parent has joint custody over a child, right, and the child has to spend 1 week at his mother and 1 week at his father, will that still be allowed? What if the two parents are in two different provinces? They have a constitutional right to see both their parents, so how will this be implemented? Thank you.
I hope that gentleman is the last one now.
Thank you, Minister. Sparrow van der Walt, Beeld and Network 24. A lot of people want to know, who go for a run in the morning or in the evening?
Well, can you repeat that? I didn't hear it. I hope.
I'm sorry.
What?
People that want to know, can they still go for a run in the morning or in the evening or whenever?
Oh, jogging. Baba.
Thank you so much. Francis Logamachata from Progressive Independent News Agency again. Quickly, what measures, to Minister of Police, what measures are in place for business, particularly those who are running and that are outside communities? Because I want to believe that some criminals might actually see this as an opportunity that there won't be a lot of movements within these farms or these resorts and want to use the opportunity to commit crimes. What measures are in place to make sure that actually these farm owners and those who are running businesses in outside the areas, communities, their
Thank you very much, colleagues. We don't know whether we should start with you, Babu Cele, with your many questions.
No, thanks. Fortunately, I'm distracted there.
Colleagues, can we allow him to answer?
Fortunately, what has been observed, some of these activities, they go with a serious reduction of crime already. The liquor and all that kind of thing. Maybe I'll mix this question with with what do we do in terms of roadblock. I think both the Minister of Defense and Minister of Police have said that the movements will be highly restricted. That includes the movement of the criminals. We are not going to say we are criminal move. The movement of the criminals, because if we move the entire nation as we are supposed to stay where we are, unfortunately, criminals are part of the nation themselves. So we'll be restricted and don't move on the roadblocks that will be there. And all form of restrictions of movement will also, actually, it might be even better this time in the movement of criminals and the criminality itself as we go for these activities. So be rest assured that there will be less crime, and be rest assured that criminals themselves will fall within the net that will be placed there by the law enforcement agencies. Whether it's a farm, whether it's a lodge and all that. But South African police, supported by the South African National Defence Force, the other question will be answered by the Minister of Defence about their training and all that. But they will be supported. There will be more of the visibility, but also of action on the road and in life general. The NCA, indeed, I think courts are still there and courts will be there. Whoever breaks the law will follow those laws of the Republic of South Africa, that police, SANDF, all other enforcement agencies, things that they can do, including, if it needs be, the other areas like IPIT and all that, as you are correct, saying that they are rocky police. By the way, they are rocky journalists. They are rocky journalists. So I hope we do have mechanism of dealing with rocky journalists. We do have a way of dealing with rocky police and otherwise. So we hope we'll deal with our rookies, you'll deal with your rookies. As the journalist and as the police. There are not too many, Babu Mthembu, as you said. Well, the other one, it's a question of the rank. I think it's Cape Town that asked this question, of rank closed. Everything is closed, except essential thing. If the rank is not carrying the normal en masse movement of those people, will be carrying the people that are supposed to go there. Even those taxis would be essential, because we'll be taking people to hospitals, we'll be taking people to electricity centers, your ESCOM and others, taking people to fix the water. If you look on those things, they are specifically mentioned by the speech of the president, the category of the people that will be moving there. And those kinds of transport become essential, carrying essential people. But if you wake up one morning at 12 o'clock and then you wash, you iron, you put yourself, say, look, I'm going to town today. No, it won't work for you, because you are not essential. That is not the essential movement. So it is on the scope, as Minister of Transport has explained. So they'll be moving this transport because of they're dealing with essential matters. People that are inside are essential, and every other movement of those people and transport is exactly the part of the essential movement. So I think those are the questions that have been sent to me to answer. Yeah, I can see that you really want the hand, you get it. You want the arm, you get it. And you want the shoulder now. We have said your appointment, your press, whatever you call it, cards, is fine, is enough. Maybe you help me, you'll still have to show your ID that this card is you. And then thirdly, you asked if we will fill the form. Last time we requested the people of restaurants to have registers. One major thing of that request, you have raised a very good point, we'll have to fill those forms. Because if the Minister of Health needs to follow you and follow the people that were around you, it will help. Indeed, it's your press card, your appointment card, is your ID, and filling the form for a better traceability where we are going. Okay, thanks.
Sorry, Chief. If we are going to do things this way, can you sit down? Let's sit down. Next answer. So sorry, sit down. But we have not said we have finished with the questions. Can you sit down? Minister of Transport.
The Minister of Trade and Industry has indicated that there are engagements with the retail sector and that there will be due consideration in terms of early opening hours for those who rely on public transport for that. Meaning, having finalized the regulations, there will be directives. So, when the regulations are implemented from today, there could be teething problems there and there. And the situation is under monitoring by the net joints, and directives will be issued by the ministers. So nothing is cast in stone. But yeah, the main issue is the enforcement of the lockdown. Meaning, you can't think that shops and everything else will be business as usual. Even when you go to the shops will have limited things, essential services. You will not access alcohol in a mall. You will not buy clothes. If you decide to leave wherever you are, to go to a mall in East Rand and all of that, it should be for essential service, meaning something that you can't get in your neighborhood. You've got a spaza shop in your neighborhood, buy there. If you want pharmacies that are open in the malls, that will be provided. In terms of time and the opening of pharmacies to be aligned with public transport, we will engage with the minister and rectify that particular arrangement. But what it means is that let's stay where we live and we buy essential goods where we live, meaning all of us, poor, rich, there is no comfortability. Now, you can't get into an Uber because it is the lockdown, you want to go and have a party with your friends. It's not allowed. Stay where you are for 21 days. So it's not something normal, like people will think that it is normal and all of that. Courier services will operate for essential goods. Again, courier services will operate for essential goods. And cargo for everything, including essential goods, air and maritime, will operate. But the crew in those air and maritime will not be allowed to disembark. But the goods that are offloaded will have to be sanitized, especially from risk countries. The country is on a lockdown. Friday asked me if you see Air Zimbabwe or Air France at our airport, how did it happen? Because from now, in terms of the NOTAM and everything else, everybody, wherever they are, they should know that we're not coming to South Africa for the next 21 days. We are not the only country. Other countries have done it, including China and everywhere else. So that has happened. So, President have directed lockdown 21 days. And in that, we've got people who are using transport for essential services. That's why we say 5 a.m. 5 a.m., we want to allow health workers to catch that early taxi to go to Paraguanath. We want to allow that worker who rely on a bus to go to Eskom. They will be picked up in a power station so that the lights are not off. That is essential service. That policeman who works at the police station, 5 a.m., will have to be there. But for those who want to buy groceries, rely on public transport, and so on, we will look at that with the Minister of Trade and Industry in terms of the distance. But we don't expect everybody in a big township, for instance, Soweto or in Sandton and all of that, to be grocerying to places where you like. It's not possible. Buy next door, buy where you live, in the areas that you can actually access. And those areas will have enough goods, which is permissible in terms of the lockdown, and so on. Truck drivers will be allowed to cross, provided they transport essential service. You will not be allowed to cross. It's a lockdown. It's closed. You will only be allowed to go to Swaziland, to Lesotho, if you are transporting medicine, food, supplies. You'll only be allowed to cross because we have not locked our sister, let me say, countries in the SADC from this arrangement. So that's it. As to what will happen at the border in terms of exchange of drivers, we don't expect that operationally to happen because you cross and then you come back because you are delivering a service. Reduction of levies for airlines and so on. our entities are considering this, and in the context of our cluster and the framework of economic measures in distress, we are considering that and what we should actually do for different airlines. And the requests on payment relief, all of those are considered. And when we have arrived at a decision on those, we will be able to provide concrete answers on those particular issues. So I'm just saying that to clarify once and once again, transport, public transport will operate from 5 to 9 o'clock every day. It caters for essential workers to go to work. Okay? From there, for them to come back from work, it will operate from 4 o'clock to 8 o'clock. In between that, we don't expect a mass movement of public transport. It's a lockdown. Should you be seen 12 o'clock midday on the street, you've got to have a good reason. Ufuna ndo estradweni. Ngoba sonke sihlele ezindlini zethu. You must have a good reason. You must provide answers that you are transporting people who are sick, or otherwise you are attending to an emergency that you can prove to the police or the soldiers that you are doing something good. But you are expected to be where you are. That's what it is. Now, if we don't even have to say if, because the order is clear, it's a lockdown. In the air, in the maritime, and also in public transport. If you look at what is happening at Park Station, we have not reached lockdown. People are carrying bags, they are getting into the trains, they are going home. There will never be a comeback from there. And number two, you must understand that long distance transport has already been suspended. Shosholoza Mail, Luxury Gautrain is gone. Rovos is added to the list. Blue Train, you'll see it after 21 days. All of those shut down. So there is nothing that is in favor of the other. Uber, it is expected that you will use Uber for essential service. Essential service, meaning you want to access a clinic, you want to access a pharmacy, you want to access. Even when you get to a mall, malls will be shut down in terms of clothing and all of that. So there's no shopping. There's no shopping. But shops will be open for you to get food, to get medicine, and that's it. And the only thing that makes us to flock in shops is because we want to drink in the bars, we want to buy clothes, we want to do all of those things. Gone. Akamatorogis. Those things are gone. So we must be very clear about that. So that is the lockdown. But the lockdown, in conclusion, Minister Mthembu, must be understood. It's not to punish everybody. It's to reduce unnecessary movement in all spheres. It's going to affect us adversely. President addressed the whole package. Our job is to execute. And we're executing that to the best of our ability, to the extent that our people also must not suffer. But it must affect all of us. Thank you very much.
Minister Magulu.
Thank you very much. You said I shouldn't go close to the mic. Thank you very much, Minister Mthembu. Colleagues, I thought we were agreed that because we are where we are now, in terms of the spiking of figures, remember when we first addressed you, we had about 62 people who are infected by this virus. Exactly 8 days later, we are now at 704 or 2, not sure. And therefore, it means that extraordinary decisions have to be taken to address extraordinary circumstances. The reality is that here, all of us, it's not about being spiteful, it's not about use of excessive power, It's not about demonstrating how powerful the state is. It really is about protecting one another, protecting ourselves from this virus. And I think if all of us agree to that, then some of the questions which have been raised here would not even arise. There's a matter here of fake videos, and I've said the president 2-3 days ago directed that on Thursday midnight, right, there'll be a lockdown. For now, we still have about 24 hours, am I right, ministers, before that time. So there is no lockdown. How many? Okay, maybe 30 hours? The point is, there is no deployment of soldiers currently in the streets of South Africa. Abeko, they are not there. And you know this, you haven't seen them. Where you have seen them, you've seen them moving in transit. You've not seen soldiers patrolling, you've not seen soldiers manning roadblocks. And I think I should also emphasize the fact that it was not a mistake when the president declared that we will operate within the terms of the Act, this Disaster Management Act. He didn't say we're going the route of Section 37 of the Constitution, which is a declaration of the state of emergency. And I think members of the South African National Defence Force do understand that we are now deploying because in the first instance, we are protecting South Africans against a virus. That our numbers have escalated and therefore we now have to come in and support the police in enforcing the law by ensuring that everybody remains behind doors. So I think that the members of the South African National Defence Force are educated enough to appreciate that law enforcement in the context of a Disaster Management Act and law enforcement in the context of a Section 37 of the Constitution, which is the state of emergency, there will be a difference between the two. So I think that it starts with us, that we must be responsible and act responsibly, even as the media. Because even this forwarding and circulating of videos which you know are fake videos, because you know they are fake. Let me just clarify something which has come out in the past 24 hours. Somebody goes to Craig Hall, infantry unit, decides when they see the soldiers to raise a question. So what's happening, guys? And one of the soldiers says, we are from Corona. And all of you know what Op Corona is. Op Corona is patrolling the borderline of South Africa. That's Operation Corona. And somebody simply decided that, Op Corona, it means they are deploying right now to support the government's initiatives against Corona. So I'm just saying sometimes it's our own mischief which exacerbates the situation and creates all of the myth and the stories which are all over about what the South African National Defence Force is likely to do. Lastly, if I may remind, it is true that because somebody asked what kind of training, it is true that precisely because the South African National Defence Force is the last line of the defence of the Republic of South Africa, of the people of South Africa. So obviously, they have not been trained in crowd control. That is why most of the time it is always the last thing we do to say, for instance, like in the Western Cape, when there was a challenge. We resisted and resisted until it got to that point that, okay, let's deploy and support the police. So here now, there is no instability, by the way. There's peace right now in South Africa. There is no ungovernability. We're talking about stemming the tide and stop the spread of the virus. And in doing so, we have to lock down, and in locking down, we have to enforce it if it is necessary, if only to protect all of us who are here in this room right now. So, this thing that members of the Defence Force are people who kick and don't skip donor and what. It will be skid and donor when circumstances determine that. For now, we are a constitutional democracy. We do understand what our obligations are in terms of the Constitution of the Republic of South Africa. Our soldiers understand the circumstances under which they are now being deployed. So to spread this thing and perpetuate this thing, Yoguti, they are going to They are going to torture people. They are going to beat people. They are going to. They don't understand human rights. By the way, in their training, they are taught what human rights is. This is a democracy. This is a South African National Defence Force, which is founded on the new constitution, the Constitution of the Republic of South Africa, not the state of emergency which we had in 1985. That's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about lockdown and supporting the police in ensuring that that lockdown is enforced. Thank you.
So thank you. Any colleague this side who still want to make it? Yeah, Lamola.
Yeah, no, thank you. I think I received almost 2 questions which are sounding a bit similar. Whether it's doesn't government think that we are overstretching the liberties or limiting them too much? And the other one was saying, was this a difficult decision for Cabinet to arrive at, considering the Constitution, and what were the philosophical discussions with regards to the limitation of rights? As I've said from the first press conference that the Cabinet was guided by the Constitution. And we were also guided by the inputs or the research advices from the Department of Health that said this is where we are. For us to flatten the curve, these are things that we need to do. And for these things that we need to do, we will then need to limit the rights of people in terms of movement, in terms of various other issues. And that is governed by Section 36 of the Constitution. And we were then guided by what previous court decisions have found about the issue of Section 36. Firstly, whether does this limit the rights of people? And secondly, that limitation, is it justifiable? In the view of Cabinet, this limitation of these rights, it is justifiable because it's in response to a global pandemic that has been declared by the World Health Organization. Then we're able to take the Disaster Management Act and put it with Section 36. Can you restrict movement? Yes. Can you restrict movement of human beings? Yes. Can you restrict movements of goods that are not necessary? Yes. So all those things that we have announced are guided by the Disaster Management Act, which allows us to limit the rights of South Africans. And the philosophical engagement, yes, did take place. To which extent do you limit these rights? It is dependent on what the Department of Health has advised us. That for you to flatten the curve, you may need a stricter restriction of movement. Hence, if you look at all the regulations, the intention is to restrict movement of people so that we are able to flatten the curve as advised by the Department of Health. It is not an easy decision because even ourselves are limited. For the first time in history, I will not be able to visit my rural village during the Easter. So it is a compromise for all of us as South Africans that we are expected to make, that we are able to restrict ourselves. The things that we could do in a normal disease, virus-free of corona, it is clear cannot happen now. And the Disaster Management Act empowers government to restrict it in terms of the Section 36 of the Constitution, which we believe it has been done in a manner that can be justifiable in an open and democratic society. So these are discussions that we had, and we are of the view that this limitation is necessary and it is justifiable to deal with the disease as per the advice of the Department of Health and the World Health Organization. With regard to the other issue that was asked about the media and the other people involved with the production and broadcasting, if you read the part of essentials, it speaks about media, broadcasting, telecommunication, infrastructure, and services. So there is a provision that covers other issues that relates to the essential services, that relates to the media or telecommunications or broadcasting in terms of infrastructure in the exemption that deals with the essential services. Thank you, Minister.
Thank you very much. Are we okay now, this side, colleagues? Can we come this side, Minister Zulu? Sawulibele sisi ngizakunceda mina anginayo ingxaki. Umama wangifundisa ukuklina. Angifundisa uyabona sisi.
There was the question about the visitation rights. I think I did indicate earlier on that out of the regulations that have already been sent to us, we still have to do directives. So we need to be able to get a bit of time to have a discussion about that within the department, but also we need to have a discussion because we wish that parents could really understand the extraordinary times that needs extraordinary action at this point in time. I did indicate earlier on that this is a sensitive matter. Parents would like to have the children going back and forth in their visit, but it will be an appeal from ourselves that parents will have to really, really think very carefully, firstly about themselves, but also the children and the exposure of the children's thereof. The parents, if they have joint parental rights, they also have joint parental responsibility. And maybe many of them will take that decision as to where the child must stay, because we're talking about 21 days for the time being. We're not talking about a lifetime where one parent will have advantage over the other. We are also hoping that parents can be able to use available communication tools at this point in time. And if it becomes very difficult, then we would also have to try and see if we can get our social workers to assist us in this instance. But again, I'm saying majority of South Africans, if not all South Africans, whether they are parents or not parents, they seem to be appreciating the challenges that we are having, and we would plead with them to really take the children's interest at heart, but also it's their interest at heart. There was a question about whether transport is going to be. There was something on the request that was sent here about transport not being allowed. I think Minister Mbalula really went and explained that very thoroughly. I don't want to go into that because it was very clear. Also, we cannot be talking about social grant recipients receiving their grant and being able to go and buy without taking into consideration that there's got to be a movement. And we will have to also see what other support can we give, because I did speak to the department this morning as well as SASSA, and I said we need to be sure that the coordination and communication between ourselves, the MECs at provinces, there's good communication, because we are here at national. We have MECs and local structures that are responsible. They must also take responsibility. The last one really that got me a bit wet up was a comparison of this period as a clampdown, is saying that is the first clampdown since apartheid. I think that Minister Lamola has clearly explained where we are, and Section 36 really clearly says requires that the weighing must have a specified substantive outcome, namely an outcome that is justifiable, is an open and democratic society based on human dignity, equality, and freedom, and is not a closed authoritarian society based on violation of human rights, dignity, equality, and freedom. Can't compare what is happening now to apartheid. You cannot do that unless you don't know what happened during that time.
Minister Patel.
Thank you very much. The questions have been asked about the regulations. The regulations, they're a basic framework. They've been led by health considerations, keeping social distance, but also in the economy and in communities. We've had to make sure that the regulations are as simple as possible to enable 60 million people in South Africa, urban and rural, young and old, suburban and township, villages, homeless, all of them to act as one. And so we've looked across the world. There is no rule book anywhere in the world that we could just simply draw from. Democracies don't prepare in normal time for lockdowns of the economies. This is an extraordinary crisis that is faced across the world. There are some lessons. Those countries that took strict measures saw the rate of infection drop sharply, and it looks like they're beginning to recover. Those economies and societies that took very flexible measures saw that the rate of infection continued to rise and that they've had to progressively step up their measures. We're trying to avoid that. We're trying to avoid that because we have to contain the spread of the virus. We have an enormous population of immunocompromised persons. If this virus spreads widely, it can cause very, very serious damage. So we will implement and learn from implementing, and we can amend the regulations as we go on. If there are gaps that we've discovered, we can bring out a new regulation. We can issue directions in terms of the law that clarifies some of the areas. The truth, though, is the virus is killing thousands of people across the world. I just looked at my phone when I heard some of the questions, and I looked at the website of one of the global newspapers. And on one page it says, death toll in Spain passes that of China. Global numbers of deaths approach 20,000. It says on the same page, Spanish Deputy Prime Minister tests positive for virus. New York Governor talks about closing streets. 4 more Italian doctors die. Britain's Deputy Ambassador to Hungary has died after contracting coronavirus. And it goes on and on and on. And so these are unusual measures, very, very unusual measures. And of course, it's painful, it's difficult to make these. They may be necessary, but it's not something that one celebrates in a democracy. All of us fought very hard for a society of freedom and choice. And we now need to fight this virus by limiting all of our freedom and choice. And we have 21 days. It's a 21-day lockdown. It's not a year, it's not 2 years. It's a 21-day lockdown to try to see can we contain this and limit the virus in that period, the spread of the virus in that period. And we're going to have to work closely with our people, with all South Africans, with the media, to get the message across that we all need to make very drastic adjustments. They're difficult. We recognize that. The question was asked about the informal sector and the challenges that people will have with livelihoods. And it's one that I think it's absolutely right. People in the informal sector, small businesses, micro enterprises, self-employed persons, they will find it very, very hard in this period. And we're looking at what measures we can put in place to be able to address this. We don't have time on our side Normally we have months and months to prepare for something. We have to deal very quickly to contain the spread of the virus. On courier services, the regulations specifically enable courier services to be used for the moving around of health products, pharmaceutical products in this period. On the items that people can buy, obviously with these things we wanted to keep the list as short and simple as possible so that we can do a quick turnaround at shops, that people spend the minimum amount of time there and travel as infrequently to the shops as is possible. Cigarettes is not a basic good. On the issues of many people are concerned about the elderly, these are absolutely valid concerns. The regulation says specifically that care services and social relief of distress provided to older persons, mentally ill, persons with disability, the sick and children are an essential service. So obviously as we go through these, we'll learn from our experience, we'll be able to amend regulations when it's needed to deal with the biggest potential public health crisis that we've seen. And it's moving with an enormous speed, and there is no treatment for it. There is, these are new areas that we're experiencing as a democracy. And so we appeal to members of the media, to our people, that we work together in the next few weeks to be able to contain this, to limit the time and to limit the spread of the virus. Thank you.
With that appeal, as Minister Mswaledi is coming, throughout the world there is only one call that is being made, and that's the call that we're making. Let's stay at home. That's all. That's the only call that we're making. Let's stay at home to contain this virus so that indeed we reduce significantly transmission of this infection from one person to another. We are standing at 709 as we speak now. Do we want it to continue? With all the difficulties that will and consequences that will arise from a bigger number of South Africans who will be infected. Minister Mswaledi, he is also a doctor.
Thank you very much. Maybe let me also add my word to this, because as I'm listening to the question, it's as if we are expecting that there will be a total lockdown, but life will go on as normal. It can't. It simply can't. A lot of things which are used to are not going to happen. There is going to be some bit of discomfort for these 21 days, but it's worth it. So as we ask these questions about what's going to happen about this and that, let's just remember that the lockdown is not supposed to be a Sunday school picnic. The issue of Lesotho special permit, the Lesotho special permit is not expiring very soon. It expired in December last year. But in November, before it expired, the cabinet approved a renewal. And we said we'll allow people to renew and we'll take applications up to the 31st of March. It has since been extended to the 15th of June. So there's no problem about the Lesotho special permit. The issue of the asylum seekers and refugees in the Green Market Square in Cape Town, also at Lindela Repatriation Center, because there are those who were in Pretoria who are there. We've been dealing with this matter. Just yesterday we had a telephone conference with the Premier of Western Cape, the City of Cape Town, the MEC for Public Works and Social Development. We've discussed this matter, and today our lawyers have been running up and down. We have communicated with the United Nations. We are trying to deal with the matter, but I can't give you the final answer now. All we said was that there need to be a reintegration. Even the portfolio committee in Parliament, if you remember, called Home Affairs, the City of Cape Town,
the Human Rights Commission, and the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, and instructed that to work together for repatriation, for reintegration into communities. But if that fails, we've got no option but to repatriate. And in preparation of what Parliament has said, I've met ambassadors of 3 countries where most of these people, the refugees there come from. More than 90% come from the DRC, about 7% comes from Burundi, and the rest come from Somalia, Rwanda, and Ethiopia. But the ambassadors which came were from DRC, were from Burundi, and were from Ethiopia. And I gave them the judgment. There's a judgment here which people might forget about. The judgment passed on the 17th and what the judge said. Very harsh words. And the ambassador of DRC said he fully agrees with those words and he won't blame South Africa if we take any action of repatriating people, if they keep on refusing all the solutions we are offering them. I think we'll give additional information later as it becomes available. Thank you very much.
Minister Nkosazana Dlamini.
Thank you very much. I didn't have a direct question, but I just think it's important for all of us to realize that this is a disaster that we are facing, and we have to deal with it expeditiously, otherwise it will be catastrophic. When we issued the first regulations, colleagues will remember that we said, depending on the situation, how it evolves, we may come up with new measures. And indeed, the President looked and analyzed together with the Cabinet, led by the Health Department. It's not only what is happening, but the projections that obviously meant that more stringent measures have to be taken in order to flatten the curve so that the number of people infected do not overwhelm our services, but also to just reduce the number of people who are infected. And I hope that all South Africans, and fortunately most South Africans, have welcomed this because they can see that if we don't take measures, it's going to be disastrous. But it's not government alone that have to act. Each and every one of us have to take action. Every South African has to take action. Every South African must know that what you are doing may save your life, but also may endanger somebody else's life, depending on what you are doing. So I got worried when I heard people asking questions, what will the police do if I lie to them? Why should we even think that we should lie to the police? We shouldn't lie to the police because the action you are taking might actually be endangering somebody else. So I'm just pleading that we, all South Africans, in solidarity, for the love of each other, one another, Ubuntu, we must take these measures seriously and hope that they will work. It's a sacrifice, no doubt, from each and every one of us for 21 days, but for the sake of our people. And I think if we are united and act together in the same direction instead of looking for loopholes of how to dodge the lockdown, then I think that way we can defeat this COVID-19, acting together, united, in solidarity, and for the love of our nation and for humanity. Thank you.
There was a gentleman, no, I'm not taking any hands now. I'll just take that one hand of a question that you think the general did not answer, you say, then I will then revert back to the general. No, this gentleman. Yes, sir. And we have been here, by the way, for 3 hours now.
Yeah. Okay, thank you so much. I really appreciate it, Minister. Minister Kele, what I wanted, two things you didn't answer is the one thing about what I asked about people that are not journalists, but they still do an essential job in getting out the news. So someone like a sub-editor or a person doing layout, they need to travel back and forth from the office because that kind of technology...
Can I answer your question?
Yes.
Can I answer your question?
Yes, Minister.
It was
please.
answered, but it's in the regulations. Maybe, I think all of us must also read the regulations. Because for journalists, now I'm trying to assist my colleagues. For journalists, it's quite clear that you use your, as they have said, you use your cards and of course accompanied by your ID. But there are others who then need to be permitted by those that they work for in terms of these essential services regulations, and there is a form that they will then have to filled by those that they work for. Just go and read the regulations, they answer these questions. All those who are in the value chain are covered in terms of the form that they will have to fill, signed by the head of the institution that they work for if they are part of essential services.
Thank you, Minister. Just the second question then. We are not asking these questions because people want to dodge the rules. They want to know the rules to abide, by the regulations because they do understand. But what I wanted to ask, and this is a question that a lot of readers ask, if my mother is sick and she's old, can I take food to her? Can I take her to the doctor? Can I take her to do some of her shopping?
Can we then, colleagues, I think it's quite helpful if we listen to one another. But I will go back again, what is the meaning of essential services? We have just explained some of them. Minister, want to explain, Minister Lamula?
I think how we have defined essential services, you will be aware that there is essential services defined in terms of the Labour Relations Act and the National Key Points Act. But this is a different situation, which is informed by the pandemic. So what is essential in a normal environment of a strike or normal environment, this situation needs, its essentials are different to that. It needs an added kind of an essential. Hence, the definition of essential services taking into cognizance the Labour Relations Act, the National Key Points Act, and also the Disaster Management Act. So we have defined essential to also include that essential services related to the National Disaster, to the Disaster Management Act, and as per the regulations. So that is how essential services is defined, and hence you will find a list of categories of what then is essential under this Disaster Management Act.
Yeah, just add something then with Valandos.
Yeah, in the services that are provided, first of all, if somebody is ill, the older people are the most vulnerable in this pandemic. Obviously, government and all of us will want them to get the services they need. And that's why I think one of my colleagues had explained, but I'll say it again. That's why specifically we've even put care services, social relief of distress provided to older persons. It's in the regulations. And then it goes on. So clearly, older people in distress, older people who need care, it's in the regulations. So, because we were as worried about the older people as all the people are asking the question. So it is in the regulations, it's explained. So if you say to the police or whatever, you are rushing because your older parent, your parent is in distress, it's in the regulation that must be attended to. It's part of the essential services that must be provided, and older people are mentioned specifically. Thank you.
Ndose, Minister Kele, you'll be the last one. Kofoza.
The question was answered by Minister Lamini Zuma. I can just add, please have a headline that says, "Don't lie." Because you came here and you said, "If you lie," your headline must say, "Please don't lie." Thank you.
Colleagues, we have been here for quite some time, and to our people at home, we have explained now what are the rules and regulations that will apply during this lockdown. And we have explained as much as we could the reasoning behind these regulations. Again, all that we are trying to do as government, working together with all other stakeholders, is to save lives, is to protect South Africans from this disease called coronavirus, is to contain the spread of this disease called coronavirus. All that we are asking, can we work together? All that we are asking, so that we don't create problems. It's not a police matter. It's a societal matter. It's not a defense matter. It's a societal matter. It's a matter that needs all of us to work together. That's all that we are asking as government. Thank you very much. This meeting is adjourned.
Minister Jackson, we still have questions from Cape Town, please.
All right, we had some of the ministers of South Africa explaining exactly what lockdown means. Welcome to the Full View. Delayed because of that press conference. And I think, Griselda, we can go through just some of the basics. No dog walking. That threatened actually to become a political issue after the health minister said this morning you can walk alone with your dog. Becky Nele, the police minister, now saying that is not allowed. It was an issue raised by the EFF. No dog walking, no liquor sales, no
for the duration
jogging.
Of that 21 days. But I think of major concern at this point is the mixed messaging that is coming from government. And I think hence you're seeing so many questions being asked time and time again, because clearly everybody wants clarity before that lockdown begins at midnight on a Thursday, which means tentatively Friday morning, 1 minute past 12 on Friday morning. And the quality of the messaging that's coming from government, and you heard the health minister say it's okay to go jogging, it's okay to walk your dog. And I think after much consideration, because it all of a sudden seemed that everybody wanted to go jogging, Francis, and no liquor sales, all of that, those stringent measures also coming from, we heard the health minister say on our sister program Morning Live that people started having parties in their complexes, in their estates, and that just defeats the purpose of this entire lockdown, Francis.
So the health minister reiterating that, talking about, asked in fact if ministers were not going too far, banning the sale of alcohol for these weeks that we're under lockdown, saying that there has been people indoors partying, that sort of behavior that can still cause infection. So that seemed to be the justification for that. Just some of the other issues coming up, price increases being discussed. The Competition Commission was there, the Consumer Commission as well, saying that there will be investigations into naming actually various outlets that have increased seemingly the prices of sanitizers, masks,
We've
things
seen
like
quite
that.
a number of those complaints over the past a couple of days from consumers who've been pointing out quite a number of these retailers, saying that the prices have just shot up quite significantly. And you'd remember that Ibrahim Patel, the Minister of Trade and Industry, also indicating already yesterday there'd been 11 of these that were under investigation for this kind of conduct. So your face masks, toilet paper, some of the pharmacies also, one in the Western Cape, in Tableview, I understand, also being fingered in alleged price hikes. So it's not a normal situation that we're in, Francis. So I think some of the privileges that we're used to are going to have to be taken away.
Yeah, one of the tricky issues perhaps is transportation. Now, there are these two blocks. So taxis will be allowed to move people between 5 and 9 a.m. in the morning, 4 and 8 p.m. at night. And very adamant the ministers are that will be for the movement of essential service workers.
But wait a minute, Francis.
We will wonder,
is that you'll have some of these essential workers at some of these hospitals who are working outside of these hours. What happens in an instance like that then, where you have nobody who is in the street? And it's a tricky situation, and I don't know how government's going to be able to handle some of these issues. But I mean, in particular, I think government would need to start communicating better, in particular in this crisis situation, and be clear about what exactly needs to happen.